30 plus. Lost 80s Hollywood legends. You won't believe how they look today. Then and now. 2026. They told us fame lasts forever, that legends fade because they lost it. But what if that story was never true? What if black excellence didn't disappear? It was pushed aside, boxed in, or only celebrated when it was no longer a threat. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on the icons who shaped generations, changed culture, and were quietly replaced before they were truly honored. This isn't nostalgia. This is a reckoning. If you grew up with these voices, these faces, these moments, stay with us. Like, subscribe, and join Legends of Black Excellence, because remembering is only the first step. Eddie Murphy. In the 1980s, Eddie Murphy wasn't just famous. He was unavoidable. Bursting onto Saturday Night Live at only 19 years old, he quickly became the most bankable black superstar Hollywood had ever seen. Films like 48 Hers Trading Places, Beverly Hills Cop, and Coming to America didn't merely succeed, they defined the decade. By the mid-1980s, Murphy was reportedly earning more than $10 million per film, a historic figure for any actor at the time, especially a young black comedian. His stand-up specials, delirious and raw, shattered attendance records and permanently reshaped American comedy with their bold, unfiltered voice. As the 1990s unfolded, the narrative around Murphy began to shift. Hollywood's tastes changed, studios grew more risk-averse, and his sharp adult comedy no longer fit neatly into the boxes executives preferred. High-profile setbacks, most notably The Adventures of Pluto Nash in 2002, which reportedly lost over $90 million, were used as proof of decline. But that framing ignored a larger truth. Murphy was navigating an industry historically quick to turn on black stars once they no longer felt new or controllable. Was Eddie Murphy actually declining? Or was Hollywood simply done investing in his evolution, instead of chasing approval? Murphy adapted on his own terms. He became the voice of Donkey in Shrek, one of the highest-grossing animated franchises in film history, introducing him to an entirely new generation. He also leaned into family-oriented hits like The Nutty Professor and Dr. Dolittle, which together grossed billions worldwide. While some critics dismissed this era, it kept Murphy commercially powerful, while allowing him to step away from the constant scrutiny that destroyed many of his peers. By the late 2010s, reassessment arrived. His acclaimed performance in Dolomite Is My Name earned major awards recognition and reminded audiences of his disciplined timing and range. Looking at Eddie Murphy then, and now, the story isn't one of loss, it's survival. He didn't disappear. He endured. In an industry that often discards black legends once trends change, Murphy stands as proof that true superstardom isn't about staying loud, it's about lasting. Prince. In the 1980s, Prince wasn't simply a superstar, he was a cultural earthquake, blending funk, rock, pop, R&B, and raw sexuality into a sound no one had heard before. Prince shattered every industry rule placed on black artists. Albums like 1999, Purple Rain, and Sign of the Times didn't just top charts, they rewrote what mainstream black creativity could look and sound like. Purple Rain alone sold over 25 million copies worldwide, while its accompanying film turned Prince into a visual and musical symbol of total artistic freedom. In an era obsessed with labels, Prince refused all of them, masculine, feminine, commercial, or safe. As the decade turned, however, Prince's relationship with the industry grew increasingly tense. He fought publicly with Warner Brothers over ownership of his master recordings, a battle that cost him radio support, marketing muscle, and mainstream visibility in the 1990s. To many casual observers, it looked like Prince had fallen off. But the truth was far more uncomfortable for the system. He chose independence over profit. He released music relentlessly, sometimes multiple albums a year, prioritizing control over chart position. Away from the spotlight, Prince remained one of the most prolific musicians in history. Estimates suggest he recorded thousands of unreleased songs, many stored in what is now known as the vault. while younger audiences associated him with his 80s peak musicians across genres, quietly studied his disciplined musicianship and refusal to compromise. He continued touring globally, often selling out arenas without mainstream promotion, proving that legacy didn't require constant visibility. Prince's death in 2016 at age 57 forced a global reckoning. Tributes poured in from artists across generations, and streams of his catalog surged by hundreds of % within days. Looking back from 2026, the then and now contrast isn't about appearance. It's about power. Prince didn't lose relevance. He rejected exploitation. In a system built to control black genius, Prince chose sovereignty, and that choice cost him spotlight but secured him immortality. Michael Jackson. In the 1980s, Michael Jackson wasn't just the biggest black superstar in the world, he was the biggest star, period. Thriller 1982 became the best-selling album in history, with certified sales exceeding 70 million worldwide, while its music videos transformed MTV and forced the industry to acknowledge black artistry on a global stage. Jackson's precision, innovation, and emotional intensity redefined pop performance. He wasn't following trends, he was setting the global standard, becoming a symbol of black excellence that crossed every cultural and geographic boundary. As the years passed, however, the narrative around Michael Jackson began to fracture. His changing appearance became a constant media obsession, often overshadowing his work. Medical experts have long confirmed that Jackson suffered from vitiligo and lupus conditions that explained much of his physical transformation, yet speculation and ridicule persisted. At the same time, the relentless pressure of fame combined with unprecedented scrutiny created a version of celebrity no one before him had survived. Did the world celebrate Michael Jackson's genius or consume him until there was nothing left to protect? Despite the controversy, Jackson's influence never truly waned. His tours in the 1990s and 2000s continued to break records, with the History World Tour drawing more than 4.5 million fans worldwide. Even as radio play fluctuated in the US, his global reach remained unmatched, particularly across Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Artists across generations quietly borrowed from his blueprint choreography, visuals, storytelling, often without acknowledgement. While public opinion in America grew divided, his artistry remained undeniable on a global scale. Michael Jackson's death in 2009 at age 50 triggered one of the largest collective mourning events in modern history. Within days, his catalog surged back to the top of global charts, confirming what time had already proven: the music never left. Looking at Michael Jackson then and now isn't about shock. It's about perspective. His face changed, the spotlight turned cruel, but the legacy endured. He wasn't lost. He was overwhelmed by a system that didn't know how to protect the very genius it profited from. Whitney Houston. In the 1980s, Whitney Houston emerged as a once-in-a-generation voice that felt almost unreal. Her 1985 debut album produced 3 #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100, and her follow-up, Whitney 1987, made history as the first album by a woman to debut at #1. By the end of the decade, Houston wasn't just popular, she was the industry's gold standard, praised for technical precision, emotional control, and a crossover appeal that redefined what a black female superstar could achieve in mainstream America. As the 1990s arrived, Houston expanded her reach with The Bodyguard 1992, a global phenomenon that sold more than 45 million copies worldwide and produced I Will Always Love You, one of the best-selling singles of all time. Yet success at that scale carried an invisible cost. Media scrutiny intensified, and her personal life became tabloid currency. While critics began framing her story as decline, the reality was more complex. Houston was navigating fame that few artists, black or white, had ever endured without protection. Behind the headlines, Houston continued to perform at an elite level. Her 1994 The Concert for a New South Africa and later international tours demonstrated vocal command even as narrative suggested otherwise. Industry records confirm she remained one of the top-selling female artists of all time, with estimated global sales exceeding 200 million records. Yet opportunity narrowed as ageism, sexism, and moral judgment reshaped how the industry treated her. Pressures rarely applied equally to her male peers. Whitney Houston's death in 2012 at age 48 forced a painful reevaluation. Tributes from artists across genres acknowledged what statistics already proved: she changed the sound of popular music forever. Looking back from 2026, the then and now contrast isn't about loss, it's about truth. Houston didn't lose her gift. She carried it under extraordinary weight. In a system that profited from her perfection but abandoned her vulnerability, Whitney Houston remains a reminder that greatness deserves care, not consumption. Denzel Washington. In the 1980s and 1990s, Denzel Washington emerged as something Hollywood rarely allowed black actors to be: consistent, respected, and undeniable. After early breakthroughs in Glory 1989, which earned him an Academy Award, Washington built a career defined by discipline rather than hype. Films like Malcolm X, Cry Freedom Philadelphia, and The Hurricane positioned him not as a trend, but as a standard. By the mid-1990s, Denzel wasn't chasing stardom. He was redefining what black leading man longevity could look like in an industry that often treated it as impossible. As Hollywood evolved, so did Washington's strategy. While many 80s icons saw opportunities shrink with age, he leaned into complexity. He chose roles that carried moral weight, authority, and contradiction. Police officers, lawyers, generals, flawed heroes. Box office data shows that from the 1990s through the 2000s, his films consistently performed well, a rare feat across decades. Yet his presence was never loud or tabloid-driven. Washington avoided celebrity theatrics, interviews remained measured, and his private life stayed protected. In the 2000s and beyond, Washington reached a level few achieve: institutional respect. His Oscar win for Training Day 2001 marked a turning point not just for his career, but for representation, a black actor portraying moral darkness without apology. Later, as a director, he brought historically grounded black stories to the screen, often without studio fanfare, but with lasting cultural impact. While newer generations labeled him veteran, his authority on screen never diminished. It deepened. Looking at Denzel Washington then and now in 2026 doesn't produce shock. It produces clarity. His face has aged, his pace has slowed, but his relevance has not faded. Unlike many legends labeled lost, Washington chose endurance over excess. In a system that often burns through black excellence, Denzel Washington stands as rare proof that legacy can be built quietly and still tower over time. Wesley Snipes. In the late 1980s and throughout the 1990s, Wesley Snipes stood at the peak of Hollywood as one of the most magnetic black action and romantic icons of his generation. With his martial arts background, razor-sharp physique, and undeniable screen presence, Snipes brought a new kind of intensity to mainstream cinema. Films like New Jack City, 1991, White Men Can't Jump, 1992, Passenger 57, 1992, and later Blade 1998 didn't just perform well, they proved that a black leading man could anchor action franchises globally. Blade alone grossed over $130 million worldwide, launching one of the earliest successful modern comic book film trilogies. Yet as the industry shifted in the early 2000s, Snipes' momentum became increasingly fragile. Hollywood's tolerance for outspoken black stars remained thin, and Snipes was known for asserting creative control and pushing back against studio expectations. At the same time, opportunities narrowed as studios leaned toward younger, more easily packaged faces. While white action stars from the same era were allowed reinvention cycles, Snipes' career became defined by risk in the eyes of executives rather than reliability. Did Wesley Snipes lose his place, or was it taken once he stopped being convenient? The most damaging blow came off-screen. Snipes' highly publicized tax case, which resulted in a prison sentence from 2010 to 2013, froze his Hollywood access entirely. During that period, he went from blockbuster headliner to industry exile, not because of talent, but because the system moved on without him. By the time he returned, the action genre had been rebooted with new heroes, and Snipes was treated as a legacy figure rather than a current force, despite his physical discipline and experience remaining intact. Looking back from 2026, the then and now contrast with Wesley Snipes isn't about aging, it's about interruption. His face carries time, but also resilience. His career wasn't lost due to lack of ability. It was fractured by a combination of institutional rigidity, legal consequences, and an industry unwilling to restore what it once celebrated. Snipes didn't fail Hollywood. Hollywood simply never learned how to preserve black action icons once the spotlight shifted. Morris Chestnut. In the 1990s, Morris Chestnut became one of Hollywood's most recognizable black romantic and action icons, admired as much for his charisma as for his physical presence. His breakthrough in Boys and the Hood 1991 introduced him as a serious dramatic actor, but it was films like The Best Man, The Brothers, and The Wood that cemented his status as the dependable, desirable leading man. Chestnut represented something rare at the time, a black male star allowed to be vulnerable, romantic, and aspirational without being reduced to stereotypes. For many audiences, he embodied stability, strength, and emotional maturity qualities Hollywood rarely preserved long-term for black actors. As the 2000s unfolded, however, Chestnut's trajectory subtly shifted. While he continued working steadily, the types of roles offered to him narrowed. Big-budget studios increasingly favored younger faces or leaned into action franchises that rarely centered black leads unless framed within specific archetypes. Chestnut never truly disappeared, but he also wasn't elevated into the long-term A-list tier that white romantic leads from the same era often enjoyed. Instead of chasing visibility at any cost, Chestnut chose consistency. He transitioned into television, where series like Rosewood, The Resident, and later streaming projects gave him sustained relevance and creative control. Industry records show that by the 2010s, television offered far more leading opportunities for black actors over 40 than theatrical film did. Chestnut adapted without scandal, without tabloid drama, and without public collapse, a quiet survival strategy rarely celebrated, but deeply intentional. Looking at Morris Chestnut then and now in 2026 doesn't produce shock. It produces reflection. His appearance has aged naturally. His frame remains disciplined, and his presence still carries authority. What changed wasn't his talent or appeal, but the industry's willingness to invest in black romantic icons beyond a certain moment. Chestnut's career wasn't lost, it was redirected. And in that redirection lies a truth Hollywood rarely admits. Longevity for black stars often comes not from preservation, but from learning how to endure when the system moves on. Larenz Tate. In the 1990s, Larenz Tate emerged as one of the most emotionally resonant black romantic icons Hollywood had produced in years. His breakout performance in Menace to Society 1993 showcased a raw vulnerability that separated him from typical street archetypes. But it was Love Jones 1997 that cemented his place in cultural memory. As Darius Love Hall Tate embodied a rare balance of intellect, softness, and masculinity, a black male romantic lead defined by poetry and emotional honesty. The film didn't dominate the box office on release, but it became a defining cult classic, especially within black communities, shaping how an entire generation imagined love. Yet that very subtlety may have worked against him. As Hollywood moved into the late 1990s and early 2000s, the industry leaned harder into spectacle franchises and narrowly defined images of black masculinity. Tate's thoughtful, introspective presence didn't fit easily into those boxes. While his white peers from the same era were allowed to mature into complex leading roles, Tate found himself offered fewer opportunities that matched his range. Did Hollywood overlook Larenz Tate? because his masculinity didn't fit its limited expectations. Rather than disappear, Tate chose a different path. He worked consistently in supporting film roles and transitioned into television where long-form storytelling offered space for nuance. His later work, including his acclaimed role in Power, reminded audiences of his quiet intensity and screen command. Industry patterns show that by the 2010s, television became a critical refuge for black actors whose film careers stalled despite proven talent. Tate's consistency was never about chasing headlines, it was about preserving craft. Looking at Larenz Tate then and now in 2026 isn't about dramatic decline or shocking transformation. His face has aged with dignity. His presence remains calm and deliberate, and his legacy endures in scenes that still feel alive decades later. Tate wasn't lost to scandal or failure. He was sidelined by an industry that struggled to sustain black romantic depth beyond a single moment. His career stands as a reminder that sometimes what Hollywood calls fading is really just quiet resilience waiting to be recognized again. Bokeem Woodbine. In the 1990s, Bokeem Woodbine carved out a presence that felt dangerous, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. He emerged during an era when Hollywood often reduced black male actors to narrow archetypes, yet Woodbine brought an unsettling intelligence to every role. Films like Dead Presidents 1995, Crooklyn 1994, and Jason's Lyric 1994 showed him as more than muscle or menace. He was layered, internal, and emotionally volatile. While he was never marketed as a traditional heartthrob, his intensity made him unforgettable, especially to audiences who recognized authenticity over polish. As the industry shifted in the late 1990s and early 2000s, Woodbine's career followed a different trajectory than many of his contemporaries. Hollywood increasingly prioritized clean, easily branded leading men, leaving less room for actors whose power came from ambiguity and edge. Woodbine continued to work, but rarely as the centerpiece. Instead, he became this kind of actor audiences remembered vividly, even when his name wasn't on the poster. Rather than chase reinvention, Woodbine leaned into longevity. He transitioned smoothly into television, where complex characters were allowed to breathe. His performances in series like Fargo earned critical acclaim and reminded the industry of his precision and restraint. Unlike many 90s icons whose careers stalled due to scandal or burnout, Woodbine's path was marked by consistency. Industry trends show that by the 2010s, prestige television offered more meaningful roles for black actors over 40 than mainstream film, and Woodbine quietly thrived in that space. Looking at Bokeem Woodbine then and now in 2026 doesn't produce shock, it produces respect. His appearance reflects time and experience, but his screen presence remains razor-sharp. He wasn't a star who fell, he was an actor who endured without compromise. In a system that often rewards comfort over complexity, Woodbine's career proves that some legends aren't preserved by spotlight, they're sustained by craft. His story challenges the idea of being lost and replaces it with something far more honest: survival on one's own terms. Leon Robinson. In the late 1980s and throughout the 1990s, Leon Robinson occupied a rare and powerful space in Hollywood, the black romantic lead who combined sensitivity, intelligence, and quiet magnetism. His breakout role as David Ruffin in The Temptations 1998 revealed a performer capable of carrying deep emotional weight, while earlier films like Cool Runnings, The Five Heartbeats, and Waiting to Exhale made him a familiar and trusted presence. Leon wasn't loud or flashy. His appeal lived in restraint, eye contact, and vulnerability. For many audiences, he represented a kind of black masculinity that Hollywood rarely knew how to sustain. As the industry moved into the late 1990s and early 2000s, however, Leon's trajectory stalled in a way that felt structural rather than personal. Hollywood's narrow imagination for black male leads hardened, favoring either hyper-violent action figures or comedic extremes. Leon's grounded, emotionally literate presence didn't fit neatly into those categories. While his white peers from similar romantic dramatic lanes were allowed to age into prestige roles, Leon saw fewer opportunities that matched his range. Rather than chase visibility, Leon pivoted with intention. He continued acting in independent films, television, and stage work, while also dedicating himself to music as the lead singer of the funk band, Leon and the Peoples. This dual-path career kept him creatively fulfilled, even if it moved him further from mainstream attention. Industry patterns show that many black actors from the 90s maintained longevity by diversifying, rather than competing for shrinking studio roles, a survival strategy rarely acknowledged in legacy conversations. Looking at Leon Robinson then and now in 2026 doesn't deliver shock or spectacle. His appearance has matured naturally. His presence remains calm and assured, and his work continues just outside the glare of hype. Leon wasn't lost to scandal, controversy, or collapse. He was redirected by an industry that struggled to preserve black romantic icons once trends shifted. His story reminds us that disappearing from the spotlight isn't the same as losing purpose. Sometimes it's choosing to endure with dignity when the system moves on. Phylicia Rashad. In the 1980s, Phylicia Rashad became one of the most recognizable and respected faces on American television. As Claire Huxtable on The Cosby Show, she represented something revolutionary for the era, a black woman who was elegant, intelligent, authoritative, and deeply human all at once. The show regularly drew over 30 million viewers per episode at its peak, and Rashad's performance helped redefine how black families, black marriages, and black professional women were seen in mainstream America. She wasn't just acting, she was shaping cultural perception. Yet that same success became a creative boundary. After The Cosby Show ended in 1992, Rashad faced a familiar industry problem. She was too iconic to escape her defining role. Television executives struggled to imagine her as anything other than Claire Huxtable, and opportunities narrowed accordingly. While white TV stars from similar hits were often rebranded or reintroduced, Rashad encountered a quieter resistance admiration without reinvestment. Was Phylicia Rashad celebrated for her excellence or confined by the very image she perfected? Rather than chase relevance on Hollywood's terms, Rashad chose range over visibility. She returned to her theatrical roots, becoming a powerhouse on Broadway and earning a Tony Award in 2004 for A Raisin in the Sun, making her the first black actress to win Best Actress in a Play. This chapter of her career rarely received the same mainstream attention as television fame, yet it demonstrated artistic growth few sitcom legends are allowed to pursue. Rashad also became a respected educator and mentor, shaping the next generation of black performers away from the camera's glare. Looking at Phylicia Rashad then and now in 2026 doesn't inspire shock. It inspires reevaluation. Her face reflects time and experience, but her authority remains intact. She wasn't lost to scandal decline or irrelevance. She was instead boxed in by an industry uncomfortable with letting black TV legends evolve beyond their most successful image. Rashad's story reveals a deeper truth. Sometimes the most dangerous place for black excellence isn't obscurity. It's being frozen in perfection, admired endlessly but rarely allowed to move forward. Keshia Knight Pulliam. In the mid-1980s, Keshia Knight Pulliam became one of the most recognizable child stars in American television history. As Rudy Huxtable on The Cosby Show, she entered millions of homes every week, symbolizing innocence, humor, and the warmth of black family life. The show regularly ranked #1 on Nielsen ratings, and Pulliam, who joined the cast at just 5 years old, grew up in front of the nation. Unlike many child actors, she delivered performances that felt natural rather than rehearsed, making Rudy not just cute but believable, a cultural touchstone for an entire generation. Yet that early success created an invisible ceiling. When The Cosby Show ended in 1992, Pulliam faced a challenge common to black child stars. The industry struggled to imagine her beyond the role that made her famous. Casting directors saw Rudy first not a developing actress. While some child stars were granted awkward reinvention arcs, Pulliam encountered a quieter resistance, polite interest without long-term investment. Instead of chasing fame at any cost, Pulliam chose stability and control. She earned a degree from Spelman College, one of the most respected historically black colleges in the country, grounding herself outside the entertainment machine. She continued acting steadily, especially in theater and television films, eventually becoming a familiar presence in Tyler Perry's stage plays and films. This transition kept her visible to black audiences, while remaining largely ignored by mainstream Hollywood, a pattern that reflects how the industry often separates working from celebrated. Looking at Keshia Knight Pulliam, then and now in 2026, doesn't produce shock. It produces clarity. Her appearance has matured naturally. Her voice carries confidence, and her career reflects intention rather than desperation. She wasn't lost to scandal, burnout, or collapse as so many former child stars were. Instead, she was boxed in by early perfection, forever linked to a role she played before adulthood. Pulliam's story reveals a deeper truth about black TV legends. Sometimes the hardest escape isn't failure, it's success that comes too early in an industry unwilling to let you grow beyond it. Alfonso Ribeiro. In the early 1990s, Alfonso Ribeiro became one of the most instantly recognizable faces on American television. As Carlton Banks on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, he delivered a performance so precise and memorable that it entered pop culture history. Carlton was polished, conservative, ambitious, and unapologetically different from the stereotypes often assigned to young black men on TV. Week after week, millions of viewers tuned in, and Ribeiro's comedic timing, physical comedy, and emotional range helped make the show one of the defining sitcoms of its era. But that same success quickly became a creative cage. When The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air ended in 1996, Ribeiro faced a familiar problem for black TV legends: the industry couldn't see past the character. Casting directors didn't see Alfonso Ribeiro, they saw Carlton. While the role was beloved, it was also so specific, so iconic, that it overshadowed his versatility as an actor, dancer, and performer. Rather than disappear, Ribeiro adapted. He continued working steadily in television guest roles and voice work, and gradually pivoted behind the camera. By the 2000s and 2010s, he found renewed visibility as a television host, most notably winning Dancing with the Stars in 2014, where audiences rediscovered the talent that had always been there. He later became the longtime host of America's Funniest Home Videos, a role that brought him back into millions of households not as a character, but as himself. This transition reflected a broader reality: hosting and unscripted television often offered longevity where scripted acting no longer did. Looking at Alfonso Ribeiro then and now in 2026 doesn't create shock, it reveals endurance. His appearance has aged naturally, his energy remains sharp, and his career reflects reinvention rather than collapse. He wasn't pushed out by scandal or lack of ability. He was boxed in by an industry that struggled to imagine black sitcom legends beyond their most successful roles. Ribeiro's journey reminds us that being lost in Hollywood doesn't always mean disappearing. Sometimes it means surviving by changing lanes while the system stays stuck in the past. Jaleel White. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Jaleel White became one of the most recognizable faces on American television. As Steve Urkel on Family Matters, White created a character so distinctive it reshaped the entire show. What began as a one-off appearance turned into a cultural phenomenon, with Family Matters routinely drawing tens of millions of viewers at its peak. Urkel's high-pitched voice, physical comedy, and unexpected heart made him unforgettable and turned White into a household name before he was out of his teens. That success, however, came with a heavy price. Urkel wasn't just popular, he was dominant, overshadowing the ensemble, and eventually Jaleel White himself. As the 1990s progressed, Hollywood struggled to separate actor from character. Casting directors didn't see White's range, they saw Urkel's suspenders. While white child sitcom stars were often allowed awkward reinventions, black child stars faced far less patience from the industry. Rather than implode under the weight of early fame, White chose steadiness. He continued acting through voice work, animation, and guest roles, lending his talent to shows like Sonic the Hedgehog and other long-running animated projects. This shift reflected a larger industry pattern. Voice acting and behind-the-scenes work often offered black actors longevity when on-camera roles dried up. White also stayed largely out of scandal, a rarity among former child stars, protecting his private life in a way that preserved both his sanity and his career. Looking at Jaleel White then and now in 2026 doesn't produce shock. It produces respect. His appearance reflects time, his confidence reflects survival, and his story reflects a system that celebrates black brilliance early but struggles to nurture it long-term. White wasn't lost to drugs controversy or collapse. He was boxed in by a role that became too successful for Hollywood to look past. His journey reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous thing for a black TV legend isn't failure. It's becoming so iconic that the industry never learns how to see you as anything else. Tatyana Ali. In the early 1990s, Tatyana Ali became a familiar and beloved presence in millions of American homes as Ashley Banks on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Unlike many child roles written as background charm, Ashley was allowed to grow on screen from a sweet, wide-eyed youngest daughter into a thoughtful, opinionated young woman navigating identity, race, and adolescence. At its peak, the show drew over 15 million viewers per episode, and Ali's natural warmth and emotional credibility made her growth feel real to an entire generation watching alongside her. But when the series ended in 1996, that same visibility became a constraint. Hollywood had watched Tatyana Ali grow up and then seemed unsure what to do with her adulthood. Casting opportunities slowed not because of lack of talent, but because the industry struggled to imagine black former child stars as complex adult leads. While Ashley Banks remained iconic, Ali herself became increasingly invisible in mainstream film conversations. Rather than chase attention recklessly, Ali chose intention. She released music in the late 1990s, including a platinum-selling album, then pivoted toward education, graduating from Harvard University with a degree in African American Studies and Government. This decision quietly disrupted the usual fallen child star narrative, but it also removed her further from Hollywood's short memory. She continued acting steadily in television, films, and series, particularly within black-focused networks, maintaining a working career, even as mainstream visibility faded. Looking at Tatyana Ali then and now in 2026 doesn't create shock. It creates perspective. Her appearance has matured naturally. Her voice carries confidence, and her choices reflect self-determination rather than desperation. She wasn't lost to scandal, burnout, or collapse. She was shaped by an industry that celebrates black youth but hesitates to invest in black adulthood, especially when it arrives without controversy. Ali's story reminds us that being boxed in doesn't always look like failure. Sometimes it looks like choosing growth in a system that only knows how to applaud you for staying the same. Angela Bassett. In the late 1980s and throughout the 1990s, Angela Bassett emerged as a force of nature in Hollywood, disciplined, commanding, and unmistakably powerful. From Boys in the Hood to her electrifying portrayal of Tina Turner in What's Love Got to Do with It? 1993. Bassett redefined what intensity and dignity looked like on screen. Her performance earned her an Academy Award nomination and established her as a serious, dramatic actress at a time when black women were rarely trusted with layered, complex roles. She wasn't sold as soft or disposable, she was presented as formidable. Yet even at the height of her acclaim, Bassett encountered an unspoken rule Hollywood rarely admits. Black women are allowed excellence, but not longevity without conditions. As the industry moved deeper into the late 1990s and 2000s, leading roles for women over 40 declined sharply. For black actresses, the drop was even steeper. While Bassett continued delivering critically respected performances, opportunities narrowed, budgets shrank, and visibility fluctuated. Why is it that when black women age in Hollywood, strength suddenly becomes too much instead of celebrated? What makes Bassett's story unique is her refusal to compromise her image or her craft. She resisted the industry's pressure to radically alter her appearance, choosing discipline, fitness, and authenticity over chasing youth through extremes. In interviews, she has openly spoken about the unrealistic beauty standards placed on women, particularly black women, who are expected to look ageless while being denied the same romantic or heroic narratives granted to their male peers. Her career path reflects intention, choosing roles that carried authority, motherhood, leadership, and emotional gravity rather than desperation. Looking at Angela Bassett then and now in 2026 doesn't inspire shock. It inspires respect. Her face reflects time, yes, but also consistency, control, and survival. She didn't fade because she lost relevance. She endured because she refused erasure. In an industry obsessed with youth and narrow beauty, Bassett stands as proof that black female icons don't disappear, they are tested. And when they remain standing, it exposes the system more than it changes them. Her legacy isn't just about how she looks today, it's about how fiercely she held space when Hollywood expected her to quietly step aside. Halle Berry. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Halle Berry reached a level of fame few black women in Hollywood had ever touched. With films like Boomerang introducing Dorothy Dandridge, X-Men, and Monsters Ball, Berry became both a box office draw and a cultural symbol. Her historic Academy Award win in 2002 made her the first black woman to win Best Actress, a moment celebrated as a breakthrough not just for her, but for representation itself. At her peak, Berry embodied beauty, vulnerability, and global stardom, carrying expectations far heavier than those placed on her peers. But history quickly revealed the cost of that pedestal. After her Oscar win, Hollywood failed to deliver a wave of equally complex roles. Instead, Berry found herself navigating an industry that celebrated her achievement while quietly limiting her options. Action roles emphasized her body over depth. Romantic leads faded, and missteps like Catwoman became shorthand narratives used to question her judgment rather than the system that boxed her in. As the years passed, the pressure shifted toward appearance and age. Berry became a constant subject of scrutiny, praised for not aging while simultaneously punished whenever she dared to look human. For black women, aging in Hollywood comes with a double bind, expected to remain flawless, yet rarely rewarded with roles that honor maturity. Berry spoke openly about the loneliness of fame-failed marriages and the emotional toll of being positioned as both exception and symbol. Her survival required resilience that went far beyond talent. Looking at Halle Berry then and now in 2026 doesn't produce shock, it produces clarity. Her face shows time, yes, but also endurance. She continues to work direct and lead on her own terms, proving she was never the problem. The real story isn't that Halle Berry lost her place. It's that Hollywood never built a system to sustain black female icons after their historic moment. Her legacy stands as a warning, and a truth-breaking barriers is celebrated, but surviving after breaking them is where the real battle begins. Robin Givens. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Robin Givens emerged as one of Hollywood's most striking black female icons, intelligent, poised, and undeniably visible. After gaining attention as a model, she broke through on television with Head of the Class, where she portrayed a confident, affluent young black woman at a time when such representations were rare. Givens symbolized aspiration and beauty without apology, navigating an industry that often struggled to place black women in roles defined by intellect rather than stereotype. Her presence felt modern, polished, and disruptive to narrow expectations. Yet as her career gained momentum, her personal life became inseparable from her public image. Her highly publicized marriage to boxer Mike Tyson in the late 1980s placed her under an intense media microscope. Allegations of abuse, tabloid coverage, and courtroom narratives shifted focus away from her work and towards spectacle. In an era that routinely punished black women for visibility, Givens was framed less as an actress and more as a headline. Opportunities didn't vanish overnight. They thinned quietly and steadily as controversy overshadowed craft. As the 1990s progressed, Givens continued working in film and television, but rarely with the same momentum or backing afforded to her earlier roles. Hollywood's tolerance for complexity in black women remained limited, especially for those labeled difficult by the press. While her male counterparts were often granted redemption arcs, Givens faced a different standard, one where youth beauty and silence were expected, and deviation carried consequences. The pressure to maintain a flawless image while aging in an unforgiving industry became another quiet barrier. Looking at Robin Givens then and now in 2026 isn't about shock or decline, it's about perspective. Her appearance has matured naturally, her confidence has deepened, and her continued presence in television reflects resilience rather than retreat. She wasn't lost to lack of talent or ambition. She was constrained by an industry and a media culture that struggled to see black women as both survivors and professionals. Givens's story reveals a recurring truth for black female icons. Visibility can be both power and punishment, and enduring that contradiction is its own form of strength. Vanessa Williams. In the early 1980s, Vanessa Williams made history before Hollywood even knew what to do with her. In 1983, she became the first black woman crowned Miss America, a breakthrough moment that symbolized possibility for an entire generation. But that moment quickly turned into controversy when unauthorized nude photos surfaced, forcing her resignation under immense public pressure. What could have ended her career instead became the beginning of one of the most resilient reinventions in modern entertainment. Williams refused to disappear, and in doing so challenged how America treats black women who fall outside its narrow expectations of perfection. Rather than retreat, Williams rebuilt herself through talent. She launched a successful music career, earning multiple Grammy nominations with albums like The Comfort Zone, while simultaneously establishing herself as a credible actress. Roles in films and television throughout the 1990s proved her versatility. But it was her work in series like Ugly Betty and Desperate Housewives that introduced her to a new generation. Still, success came with conditions. Hollywood embraced her elegance but often hesitated to center her fully, especially as she aged. As the years passed, Williams faced the familiar double bind placed on black female icons, praised for beauty, yet relentlessly measured against it. Aging became a quiet obstacle, not because her talent diminished, but because the industry's imagination did. Despite decades of proven excellence across music theater and television, leading roles grew rarer. Her disciplined poise and refusal to chase extreme cosmetic alteration stood in contrast to an industry obsessed with youth, often rewarding silence over longevity. Looking at Vanessa Williams then and now in 2026 doesn't inspire shock, it demands respect. Her face reflects time, experience, and survival, not decline. She didn't lose relevance. She outlasted a system that tried to reduce her to a single scandal. Williams' career is not a redemption story, it's a correction. She was never the mistake. The real failure was an industry that tested her endurance more than her peers. In standing firm across 4 decades, Vanessa Williams proved that black female icons don't need reinvention to endure, they need recognition for the strength it takes to remain visible at all. Lynn Whitfield. In the late 1980s and throughout the 1990s, Lynn Whitfield emerged as one of the most elegant and emotionally precise black actresses working in Hollywood. Her breakout portrayal of Josephine Baker in The Josephine Baker Story 1991 earned her an Emmy Award and instantly elevated her into a rare category, a black woman trusted to carry history, sensuality, intelligence, and vulnerability on her shoulders. Whitfield's presence was deliberate and refined, the kind of beauty that didn't shout for attention, but commanded it. She wasn't cast to decorate scenes, she anchored them with authority and restraint. Critical acclaim, however, did not translate into long-term protection. As the industry moved through the 1990s, roles for black women over 40 declined sharply, and the few that remained often lacked complexity. Whitfield found herself widely respected, yet increasingly underutilized, a pattern familiar to many black female icons whose excellence was celebrated but not sustained. Hollywood's admiration seemed conditional, as if her value came with an unspoken expiration date tied to youth rather than ability. Rather than conform or retreat, Whitfield chose control. She continued working consistently in film and television, selecting roles that reflected maturity, leadership, and emotional gravity instead of chasing visibility through reinvention. Her later performances, including acclaimed work on Greenleaf, demonstrated that age deepened her artistry rather than diminished it. As opportunities in major studio films narrowed, cable and streaming platforms became more willing to invest in layered roles for seasoned black actresses, spaces where Whitfield continued to assert her presence with dignity. Today, Lynn Whitfield's career stands as a quiet counterpoint to Hollywood's obsession with youth. Her face reflects time and experience, her screen presence remains composed and assured, and her legacy is rooted in discipline rather than spectacle. She was not lost to scandal, irrelevance, or decline. She was shaped by an industry that struggles to imagine black female excellence beyond its most marketable moment, and her endurance exposes that limitation more than it diminishes her contribution. Chris Rock. In the late 1980s and throughout the 1990s, Chris Rock rose from sharp-edged stand-up to become one of the most influential voices in American comedy. After gaining national attention on Saturday Night Live, Rock exploded with Bring the Pain, 1996, a special that didn't just make people laugh, it reframed how race politics and black life were discussed on mainstream stages. His cadence, fearless honesty, and moral clarity made him unavoidable. By the end of the decade, Rock was selling out arenas, headlining films, and shaping the tone of comedy itself. As the 2000s arrived, Rock expanded into film and television writing, directing, and starring in projects that blended humor with social critique. Head of State and Everybody Hates. Chris showed range, but they also marked a shift. The industry increasingly preferred safer, broader comedy, while Rock's work stayed confrontational. Over time, the space for that kind of truth-telling narrowed and the spotlight softened. Did comedy move on from Chris Rock, or did it become less willing to hear what he was saying? Rather than fade quietly, Rock recalibrated. He returned to stand-up with specials that were more reflective, dissecting marriage accountability and cultural change with a veteran's precision. Yet, the mainstream reaction grew polarized. In an era of instant outrage and shortened attention spans, nuance became risky. For black comedy legends, the margin for error has always been thinner, and longevity often comes with louder scrutiny than praise. Rock's influence remained undeniable, but the industry's enthusiasm for centering it waned. Looking at Chris Rock today, the contrast isn't about relevance, it's about patience. His voice is still sharp, his timing still exact. What changed is the ecosystem around him. Comedy once rewarded discomfort, now it often avoids it. Rock wasn't forgotten because he lost his edge, he kept it. And in a mainstream that cycles quickly through trends, that constancy can look like disappearance. His legacy reminds us that some legends aren't pushed aside by failure, but by an industry that moves faster than the truths they're determined to tell. Martin Lawrence. In the early 1990s, Martin Lawrence was not just a star, he was the engine of black mainstream comedy. From Def Comedy Jam, which he hosted and shaped into a cultural force, to his breakout sitcom, Martin Lawrence, defined the rhythm, fashion, slang, and humor of an era. The show routinely drew over 10 million viewers a week, and his ability to transform into multiple characters made him feel unstoppable. At his peak, Lawrence wasn't chasing Hollywood. Hollywood was chasing him. That dominance carried into film. Bad Boys, Big Mama's House, and Blue Streak turned him into a box office fixture with several films grossing hundreds of millions worldwide. Yet behind the scenes, the pressure was mounting. Lawrence was carrying enormous expectations in an industry that demanded constant output while offering little protection. Public incidents in the late 1990s and early 2000s, later acknowledged as mental health struggles, were quickly framed as instability rather than warning signs. As Hollywood entered a new era, Lawrence's presence shifted. The industry moved towards sleeker franchises and younger comedic voices, while Lawrence's raw physical style was treated as of another time. Unlike many white comedy stars who were allowed soft landings or reinventions, Lawrence's momentum slowed abruptly. Roles became less frequent, and the narrative quietly changed from dominance to absence, even though audiences never truly stopped loving him. Today, Martin Lawrence's legacy feels clearer than ever. His influence is embedded in generations of comedians who followed his blueprint, even if his name isn't always credited. His return in later Bad Boys installments wasn't nostalgia. It was proof of unfinished business. His face shows time his pace has slowed, but his cultural impact hasn't faded. Lawrence wasn't forgotten because he failed. He was pushed to the margins once the system extracted what it needed. His story reveals a hard truth about black comedy legends. When the laughter stops being convenient, the industry moves on even if the audience never does. Damon Wayans. In the late 1980s and throughout the 1990s, Damon Wayans stood at the center of a comedy revolution that reshaped black entertainment. From In Living Color to Mo Money and Major Payne, Wayans helped create a new comedic language, bold, physical, socially aware, and unapologetically black. In Living Color in particular became a cultural disruptor, launching careers, challenging network norms, and pulling millions of young viewers away from traditional sitcom comedy. Damon wasn't just performing. He was building a platform where black humor could be sharp, weird, political, and wildly successful at the same time. As the 1990s progressed, Wayans transitioned into film stardom, becoming a reliable box office presence. Yet his comedy didn't always align with Hollywood's comfort zone. His humor often pushed against authority, masculinity norms, and respectability politics elements that studios embraced briefly then slowly retreated from. When the industry pivoted towards safer, more formulaic comedy, Wayans' edge was quietly rebranded as too specific rather than essential. Unlike many stars whose decline is tied to scandal or collapse, Wayans simply chose a different rhythm. He stepped away from constant film output and focused on writing, producing, and later television work that offered more control. Shows like My Wife and Kids proved his ability to adapt, drawing strong ratings and presenting black family life with humor and stability. Still, despite consistent success, mainstream conversations often treated his era as over-favoring newer voices, while overlooking the architects who made those voices possible. Looking at Damon Wayans today reveals not disappearance but displacement. His face reflects time, his voice carries authority, and his influence remains embedded across comedy, television, and culture. He wasn't pushed aside by failure. He was edged out by an industry that cycles legends faster than it honors them. Wayans' story reminds us that for black comedy, pioneers being labeled forgotten often means something else entirely. The work was so foundational that Hollywood moved forward without looking back to credit who built the stage in the first place. Tommy Davidson. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Tommy Davidson emerged as one of the most electrifying performers in black comedy. As a standout cast member on In Living Color, Davidson's elastic face, musical impressions, and fearless physicality made him impossible to ignore. He wasn't just telling jokes, he was performing at full throttle, often stealing scenes with characters that felt improvised yet precise. At a time when network television rarely allowed black comedians to be weird, wild, or emotionally unfiltered, Davidson embodied all three. To many viewers, he represented a new kind of comedic freedom that felt limitless. But that same explosiveness proved difficult to translate into long-term mainstream protection. When In Living Color ended, Hollywood struggled to figure out how to package Davidson beyond sketch comedy. While some of his peers transitioned into film franchises or sitcom leads, Davidson found himself circling supporting roles and short-lived projects. His talent was undeniable, but the industry lacked patience for performers who didn't fit clean leading man formulas. As the 1990s moved forward, Davidson continued working steadily in stand-up television guest spots and voice acting, but largely outside the mainstream spotlight. His later success voicing characters on animated series like The Proud Family introduced him to younger audiences, yet this era rarely came with the same visibility or respect as his early television dominance. Like many black comedy legends, Davidson remained active but was quietly reclassified from star to familiar face, a shift driven more by industry taste than by ability. Looking at Tommy Davidson today, the story isn't one of collapse or scandal, it's one of displacement. His face reflects time, his energy remains sharp, and his comedic instincts are still intact. What changed was the system around him. Hollywood often celebrates black comedy when it's new and disruptive, then struggles to sustain it once the shock fades. Davidson wasn't forgotten because he lost his gift. He was moved aside once his originality became inconvenient to market a reminder that in comedy, especially black comedy, longevity often depends less on talent and more on whether the industry knows how to keep honoring the people who helped change it. Kadeem Hardison. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Kadeem Hardison became the face of a smarter, more progressive kind of black television comedy. As Dwayne Wayne on A Different World, Hardison embodied a generation navigating ambition, identity, and love inside historically black college culture. The show regularly pulled in over 10 million viewers at its peak, and Dwayne's evolution from cocky freshman to thoughtful partner made him relatable in a way few sitcom characters achieved. Hardison wasn't just funny. He was emotionally grounded, stylish, and aspirational, offering black male representation rooted in growth rather than gimmicks. That success, however, came with a familiar cost. When A Different World ended in 1993, Hardison faced the industry's quiet resistance to reimagining black sitcom leads beyond their defining roles. Casting rooms still saw Dwayne Wayne's flip-up glasses before they saw Hardison's range. While white sitcom stars were often ushered into film transitions or prestige arcs, Hardison encountered a slower lane, steady work, but fewer spotlight opportunities. Instead of chasing reinvention through spectacle, Hardison chose longevity through craft. He worked consistently in television and film, taking supporting roles that showcased reliability and nuance. Over time, he became a trusted presence, someone audiences recognized even if the industry no longer centered him. This path mirrored a broader pattern for black comedy actors of his era, remaining employed without being celebrated, visible without being elevated. It wasn't decline, it was containment. Today, Kadeem Hardison's legacy reads clearer than the headlines ever did. His face shows time, his performances show restraint, and his influence remains embedded in how black male characters are written with intelligence and vulnerability. He wasn't pushed aside by scandal or failure. He was quietly boxed in by an industry that celebrated black comedy when it was youthful and novel, then hesitated to sustain it into maturity. Hardison's story reminds us that being labeled forgotten often means something else entirely, that the work mattered so deeply it became foundational even as the spotlight moved on. Grace Jones. In the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s, Grace Jones wasn't simply an artist, she was a provocation. With her razor-sharp cheekbones, androgynous silhouette, and unapologetic confidence, Jones shattered every conventional idea of beauty, gender, and black femininity that Western media tried to enforce. Albums like Nightclubbing and Slave to the Rhythm fused reggae, funk, new wave, and performance art, while her visual presence turned fashion runways, music videos, and magazine covers into acts of rebellion. Grace Jones didn't ask to be understood, she demanded space. Yet that radical originality came at a cost. While her influence spread across music, fashion, and pop culture, mainstream recognition never matched her impact. Hollywood and the music industry struggled to categorize her, and what couldn't be neatly packaged was quietly sidelined. Jones was too black, too foreign, too gender fluid, too confrontational for systems built on comfort and predictability. Was Grace Jones overlooked because she lacked mass appeal, or because she refused to dilute her power for it? Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Jones continued creating, performing, and influencing even as commercial opportunities narrowed. Designers, photographers, and younger artists openly cited her as a blueprint, while institutions hesitated to celebrate her fully. Unlike artists rewarded with lifetime honors and legacy campaigns, Jones often existed as a reference point rather than a recipient of sustained recognition. Her work lived everywhere in fashion editorials, avant-garde pop, and modern performance art, yet official acknowledgement lagged behind the reality of her reach. Looking at Grace Jones today, the contrast isn't about decline or nostalgia. Her presence remains, commanding her image unchanged in its authority, and her legacy undeniable. She didn't disappear because she lost relevance. She was minimized because her kind of freedom threatened the boundaries the industry relies on. Grace Jones stands as a reminder that some black artists don't fit into legacy boxes, they reshape the boxes themselves. Her story exposes a recurring truth: the greater the disruption, the smaller the institutional applause. And yet decades later, her shadow still looms large over culture that continues borrowing her vision without fully honoring the source. Erykah Badu. In the late 1990s, Erykah Badu emerged as the spiritual center of a movement rather than a conventional pop star. With the release of Baduism in 1997, she helped define neo-soul as a counterweight to an industry leaning heavily toward commercialization. Her voice felt intimate, conversational, and rooted in black musical ancestry, jazz, blues, hip-hop, and gospel woven together with intellect and vulnerability. Badu wasn't selling escapism. She was offering reflection. In doing so, she became a cultural touchstone for listeners who wanted depth over polish and truth over trends. Yet that very depth limited how the mainstream chose to celebrate her. While her influence spread rapidly across music, fashion, and Black thought, institutional recognition remained modest compared to her impact. Badu resisted the industry's push to simplify her image or mute her perspective. Her lyrics challenged patriarchy, capitalism, and spiritual emptiness themes that rarely translate into mass marketing campaigns. As the 2000s progressed, Badu remained prolific but deliberately elusive. She released music on her own timetable, collaborated selectively, and prioritized live performance as a sacred exchange rather than a product. Her public persona, often framed as eccentric or controversial, became an easy distraction for media unwilling to engage with her ideas. While younger artists openly credited her as a blueprint for authenticity and creative autonomy, industry accolades lagged behind. She was celebrated in whispers, rather than honored in headlines. Looking at Erykah Badu today reveals not disappearance, but defiance. Her face reflects time, her presence remains magnetic, and her influence continues to ripple through contemporary Black music and culture. She didn't fade from relevance. She opted out of systems that measure worth through charts alone. Badu's legacy exposes a recurring pattern for Black cultural icons. The more they insist on artistic sovereignty, the smaller the official applause becomes. Yet decades later, her voice still guides conversations about identity, freedom, and Black womanhood. In that sense, the recognition may be limited, but the inheritance she left behind is vast, living on in every artist who chooses truth over convenience. Maxwell. In the late 1990s, Maxwell arrived as a quiet revolution. While mainstream R&B leaned toward spectacle and crossover formulas, Maxwell's Urban Hang Suite, 1996 re-centered intimacy, musicianship, and emotional restraint. His falsetto wasn't flashy, it was precise and patient. Songs unfolded like conversations steeped in soul jazz and funk traditions that felt both timeless and contemporary. The album went multi-platinum and helped define the neo-soul movement, proving there was still a massive audience for subtlety in a loud era. That success, however, didn't translate into constant institutional celebration. Maxwell resisted the industry's pressure to overproduce or overexpose himself, releasing music on long intervals and protecting his private life. In a business that rewards frequency and visibility, restraint can be misread as absence. As trends shifted in the 2000s, his influence spread everywhere, heard in younger artists' phrasing and arrangements, yet official accolades lagged behind the cultural footprint he left. When Maxwell returned with Black Summer's Night, 2009, the reception confirmed what time had already proven the audience never left. The album debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200 and earned Grammy recognition, reaffirming that his approach craft over churn could still command the mainstream. Even then, he avoided the pop cycle, choosing selective touring and careful releases. In an age of constant drops and algorithmic pressure, Maxwell's pacing felt almost radical, privileging longevity over momentum. Today, Maxwell's legacy reads as discipline rather than disappearance. His voice carries the same warmth, his performances retain their intimacy, and his catalog continues to age gracefully. He wasn't sidelined by failure or controversy. He stepped outside a system that equates noise with relevance. Maxwell's story exposes a familiar truth about Black cultural icons. The deeper the artistry and the firmer the boundaries, the smaller the institutional applause can become. Yet influence doesn't measure itself in headlines alone. It lives in the music that lasts and in the artists who learn that honoring the craft is sometimes the most enduring form of recognition. D'Angelo. In the mid-1990s, D'Angelo emerged as a seismic shift in Black music, redefining soul with a depth and sensuality that felt both ancient and urgent. Brown Sugar, 1995, announced a writer-producer and multi-instrumentalist steeped in gospel funk and Prince-era experimentation. Then came Voodoo 2000, an album so immersive it altered the cadence of R&B itself, loose, human, imperfect by design. Its influence rippled instantly, live room grooves behind the beat vocals, and a return to musicianship over polish. D'Angelo didn't just release records, he reset the language of contemporary soul. Yet the very moment of cultural dominance carried an unexpected burden. The visual fixation that followed, especially after the untitled How Does It Feel? Video reduced a complex artist to a spectacle, flattening the conversation around his work. As expectations intensified, so did pressure. The industry's appetite for constant access clashed with D'Angelo's inward, painstaking process, and his long silences were misread as retreat rather than resistance. Behind the scenes, D'Angelo battled exhaustion addiction and the weight of myth-making that demanded another Voodoo on command. Years passed without releases, and mainstream attention moved on, even as his influence became unavoidable in the music of countless successors. This paradox, ubiquitous impact, minimal recognition, exposed a familiar pattern. Black innovators are celebrated for changing the game, then quietly sidelined when they won't play it faster. The legacy grew, the applause shrank. When Black Messiah arrived in 2014, it landed not as a comeback but as a reckoning. Urgent, political, and fiercely musical, it affirmed that D'Angelo's silence had been incubation, not absence. Today, his catalog stands as a masterclass in patience and purpose. He wasn't lost to irrelevance. He stepped outside an economy that confuses output with value. D'Angelo's story clarifies a hard truth about Black cultural icons. The more transformative the art, the less likely it is to be continuously rewarded by institutions built on speed. Yet time has proven what trends could not. His work endures because it was never rushed, and its inheritance continues to shape the sound long after the spotlight drifted elsewhere. Lauryn Hill. In the mid to late 1990s, Lauryn Hill stood at the absolute center of Black cultural expression. As a member of the Fugees, she helped create The Score, 1996, one of the best-selling hip-hop albums of all time, blending rap soul and social consciousness into a global phenomenon. Then, in 1998, the miseducation of Lauryn Hill arrived, a rare cultural event that transcended genre. It sold over 19 million copies worldwide and earned 5 Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year. Hill wasn't just successful. She redefined what a black woman in music was allowed to sound like, think like, and demand. Yet that level of brilliance came with a cost few systems are built to absorb. Almost immediately, the industry began demanding replication instead of evolution. Interviews turned invasive expectations became suffocating, and Hill's refusal to play the celebrity game was reframed as difficult. As the spotlight intensified, so did her resistance. In the years that followed, Hill largely stepped away from the traditional album cycle. Legal disputes, personal struggles, and a deep mistrust of the music industry pushed her further from mainstream participation. While critics framed her absence as a fall from grace, her influence only expanded. Entire generations of artists from neo-soul to conscious hip-hop built careers on foundations she laid. The paradox was stark. Her music became required listening while her presence was treated as optional. Looking at Lauryn Hill today reveals not disappearance but defiance. Her performances remain powerful, her words still resonate, and her legacy remains unmatched for an artist with such a brief official catalog. She wasn't lost because she lacked discipline or talent. She was minimized because she refused to surrender autonomy in an industry that profits from control. Lauryn Hill's story exposes a recurring truth behind black cultural icons. The more an artist insists on truth boundaries and ownership, the smaller the institutional applause becomes. Yet decades later, her work still speaks louder than trends, proving that true legacy doesn't require constant output, only honesty that refuses to expire. Tupac Shakur. In the early 1990s, Tupac Shakur rose as a voice that felt impossibly alive, raw, poetic, and unfiltered. He wasn't just a rapper. He was a storyteller, shaped by contradiction, carrying tenderness and rage in equal measure. Albums like Me Against the World and All Eyes on Me didn't simply top charts. They documented a generation wrestling with poverty, policing, love, and survival. By his mid-20s, Tupac had sold tens of millions of records worldwide and crossed into film with performances that revealed depth far beyond the headlines. His presence felt urgent because he spoke as if time was already running out. That urgency became a trap. The industry amplified conflict, rewarded spectacle, and turned Tupac's vulnerability into a marketable persona. Legal troubles, public feuds, and relentless media framing reduced a complex artist to a caricature of chaos. Yet even in the noise, his writing sharpened, more introspective, more political, more human. Did the world hear Tupac's warnings or only the drama surrounding his pain? When Tupac was killed in 1996 at just 25, the reaction was immediate and seismic. Mourning poured in from communities that had felt seen by his words. Posthumous releases surged. His catalog climbed charts again and again, cementing him as one of the best-selling artists in history. But something else happened too. The conversation shifted. Lines once dismissed as angry were reinterpreted as prophetic. His compassion for women, his critiques of power, and his insistence on dignity were suddenly acknowledged after the voice had been silenced. The industry that struggled to protect him now celebrated his legacy. Looking back, Tupac's story defines the painful truth of being loved after loss. His image aged into iconography. His ideas aged into curriculum. He wasn't perfected by death. He was clarified. What fame couldn't hold memory preserved. Today his face still moves. Crowds, his verses still spark debate, and his influence still shapes artists across genres. Tupac wasn't embraced because he fit the system. He's revered because he challenged it. And in that reverence lies the question we keep returning to: Why do black legends so often receive their fullest recognition only when they can no longer speak back? Aaliyah. In the mid to late 1990s, Aaliyah emerged as a once-in-a-generation presence, cool, controlled, and quietly revolutionary. With a voice that favored texture over power, she redefined R&B at a time when excess ruled the charts. Albums like One in a Million and Aaliyah blended futuristic production with understated emotion, setting a template that countless artists would later follow. On-screen roles in Romeo Must Die and Queen of the Damned revealed a natural camera magnetism that suggested a long genre-crossing career ahead. She didn't chase attention, it followed her. Yet Aaliyah's impact wasn't fully measured while she was here. The industry praised her style and promise, but often spoke of her in the future tense, what she would become, what she might do next. Her restraint, her refusal to oversell, and her commitment to craft were admired, but not always rewarded with the institutional protection afforded to louder stars. When Aaliyah died in the plane crash in 2001 at just 22, the loss rippled instantly and globally. Fans mourned the artist they loved, but the broader culture began to reassess what it had missed. Her catalog surged, tributes multiplied, and her influence became unmistakable across pop R&B and hip-hop, from vocal minimalism to visual aesthetics. Producers and singers openly cited her as a blueprint. The industry that once framed her as next now spoke of her as foundational. Looking back, Aaliyah's legacy clarifies a painful pattern. Some black legends are fully celebrated only after absence sharpens our vision. Her music didn't age, it set the pace. Her image didn't fade, it became timeless. She wasn't perfected by tragedy, she was revealed by it. Today, her work still sounds contemporary, her style still feels modern, and her presence still guides artists who never met her. Aaliyah was loved while alive, but understood after loss. And that truth leaves us with an enduring question: why does it so often take silence for the world to finally listen? Bernie Mac. In the 1990s, Bernie Mac rose with a voice that cut through comedy like a warning siren. He didn't soften his delivery or disguise his truths. He confronted audiences head-on with humor forged from lived experience. From his legendary Def Comedy Jam performance to stand-up specials that blended discipline, pain, and love, Bernie spoke for people rarely centered in mainstream laughter. His comedy wasn't just funny, it was instructive, rooted in responsibility, survival, and an insistence on dignity that made him instantly recognizable. Hollywood eventually took notice and success followed. Films like the original Kings of Comedy Ocean's 11 and Bad Santa introduced Bernie Mac to global audiences, while The Bernie Mac Show became a landmark. The series drew strong ratings and critical praise, offering a rare portrayal of a black man balancing toughness with tenderness, authority with care. Yet even as acclaim grew, the framing stayed narrow. Bernie was celebrated for being raw, not always for being profound. Behind the scenes, Bernie carried health challenges, quietly battling sarcoidosis for decades while maintaining an exhausting work pace. The grind of production rarely slowed to accommodate care, a reality many black performers know too well. Still, he kept working, mentoring younger comedians, and expanding his range without abandoning his principles. His presence felt stabilizing, as if he were anchoring a lineage of black comedy grounded in accountability rather than spectacle. When Bernie Mac died in 2008 at 50, the reaction revealed what had been underestimated. Tributes poured in, reruns surged, and audiences rewatched his work with new ears. Lines once laughed at landed heavier, wiser. His insistence on respect, especially for children, elders, and community, read as philosophy, not punchline. Bernie wasn't perfected by loss, he was clarified. Today his cadence echoes in the voices of comedians who followed, and his lessons feel more urgent than ever. He was loved while alive, but fully honored after he was gone. Another reminder that black legends are too often understood only when the laughter has already faded into memory. Chadwick Boseman. In the 2010s, Chadwick Boseman emerged as a rare kind of black legend, one built on intention, discipline, and quiet authority rather than spectacle. Before global fame arrived, Boseman committed himself to portraying history with care, embodying figures like Jackie Robinson, James Brown, and Thurgood Marshall with restraint and gravity. When Black Panther 2018 arrived, it became a cultural milestone, grossing over $1.3 billion worldwide and reframing what a black-led blockbuster could mean. Boseman's T'Challa wasn't loud or exaggerated. It was regal, thoughtful, and grounded, an image of black power defined by responsibility. What the world didn't know was the weight he carried while building that legacy. Boseman was privately battling colon cancer throughout much of his most visible work, including Black Panther Avengers Infinity War Avengers Endgame and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. He worked through chemotherapy and surgeries without public acknowledgement, refusing to center his illness over the stories he believed needed telling. When Chadwick Boseman died in 2020 at just 43, the shock was immediate and global. Tributes poured in from leaders, artists, athletes, and fans who realized too late the scale of his endurance. Performances once praised for their calm intensity were rewatched with new understanding. His final role in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom earned posthumous awards recognition not as a farewell tour, but as proof of an actor operating at his peak while carrying unimaginable pain. The industry that often rewards vulnerability as content was forced to reckon with dignity as choice. Boseman's legacy crystallized after his passing in a way that defines the phrase "loved after loss." He didn't need longevity to leave impact. He needed purpose. His image now stands for something larger than fame, service to story, respect for history, and leadership without noise. Chadwick Boseman wasn't elevated by death. He was revealed by it. And his life leaves an enduring question for Hollywood and audiences alike. Why do we so often wait for silence to recognize the strength that was standing in front of us all along? Michael K. Williams. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Michael K. Williams emerged as a presence that felt painfully real. With a scarred face and searching eyes, he didn't play characters, he inhabited them. His breakout role as Omar Little on The Wire redefined what television could ask of an audience: empathy for contradiction, humanity inside violence, tenderness inside danger. Omar wasn't a stereotype. He was a moral puzzle. At a time when black men on screen were often flattened into archetypes, Williams delivered nuance with surgical precision, turning quiet moments into thunder. Yet that brilliance lived mostly outside the rewards Hollywood reserves for its favorites. While The Wire grew into a critical cornerstone, its actors, especially black actors, were rarely elevated by the system in real time. Williams continued choosing demanding roles in Boardwalk Empire, 12 Years a Slave, and later Lovecraft Country, each performance adding layers to a legacy built on truth rather than visibility. Still, the gap between influence and institutional praise remained wide. Off-screen, Williams was open about his struggles with addiction and recovery, speaking candidly to destigmatize pain without glamorizing it. His honesty became part of his artistry, informing performances that felt lived in rather than performed. But vulnerability rarely comes with protection. The pace of work, the pressure to deliver intensity, and a system that celebrates authenticity without sustaining it, placed a heavy toll on an artist who gave everything he had to the work. When Michael K. Williams died in 2021 at 54, the response revealed a familiar, painful pattern. Tributes poured in from peers who called him irreplaceable. Scenes were rewatched with a new ache. His performances didn't improve after his passing, they clarified. Lines once admired became devastating. Silences became sermons. Williams wasn't perfected by loss. He was understood by it. Today, his legacy stands as a testament to what happens when truth outpaces recognition. He was loved deeply, but too often quietly while alive, and honored loudly after he was gone. His story leaves us with an enduring reckoning. How many black legends do we truly see, Only once their voices can no longer speak back. Legends don't disappear. They are displaced, delayed, or denied their flowers until silence forces reflection. From comedy to music to film, Black excellence has repeatedly shaped culture while being under-celebrated in real time. Too often, praise arrives after the headlines fade, after the voices are gone, after the system no longer feels threatened. The question isn't whether these icons mattered. History already answered that. The real question is harder: why does recognition for Black greatness so often come late, limited, or posthumous? At Legends of Black Excellence, we don't just remember, we challenge the pattern. So ask yourself, who are we still overlooking today while they're still